When I look back at my journey, I can confidently say that it wasn't luck, it wasn't just hard work, and it certainly wasn't overnight success that took me from struggling to thriving. It was a series of mindset shifts, 7 to be exact, that completely transformed the way I approach life, money, and opportunity. And those shifts made me millions. Today, I want to share them with you because the same mental changes that unlocked my success can do the same for you. The first mindset shift was moving from scarcity to abundance. For most of my life, I believed there wasn't enough to go around. If someone else won, I thought it meant I had lost. That thinking kept me small. But when I began to believe that opportunities are limitless, that money can always be created, and that success isn't a pie where my slice takes away from yours, everything changed. Abundance thinking allowed me to collaborate, to invest, and to take bold risks. The second shift was from being busy to being productive. For years, I wore business like a badge of honor, thinking the harder I worked, the more I'd achieve. But wealth doesn't come from motion, it comes from results. Once I stopped filling my days with low-value tasks and focused only on the activities that moved the needle, my income started multiplying. Productivity isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. The third shift was from spending to investing. Early on, every time I made money, I spent it to impress others. Nice clothes, a fancy car, things I didn't need. That mindset kept me broke. When I realized that every dollar is a soldier that can either die for vanity or work for my future, I chose to invest in myself, in education, in assets, in businesses. And those investments returned tenfold. The fourth shift was from fear of failure to hunger for learning. I used to avoid risks because I didn't want to look foolish. But then I realized the people I admired most failed more times than I had even tried. Every failure became tuition for success. Once I embraced failure as feedback instead of defeat, I started moving faster and gaining confidence with every lesson. The fifth shift was from asking, what do I get, to how can I serve? Money is a reward for solving problems. The more people you help, the more value you add, the more income you create. When I stopped chasing money and started chasing impact, not only did I earn more, but I also built deeper relationships and greater influence. The sixth shift was from short-term thinking to long-term vision. Quick wins used to excite me, but they never lasted. I had to learn patience. I had to understand compounding, whether in money, habits, or relationships. The moment I aligned my actions with a 5-year, 10-year, even 20-year vision, my decisions became smarter. My discipline grew stronger and my wealth began to snowball. And the seventh mindset shift was from self-doubt to self-belief. Nothing changes until you believe you're worthy of success. I had to silence the inner critic telling me I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or connected enough. When I replaced that voice with one of certainty and belief in my potential, doors began to open, confidence attracts opportunities, and people follow leaders who believe in themselves. These 7 shifts didn't just make me money, they made me a new person. They reshaped how I think, how I act, and how I live. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that wealth is built in the mind before it shows up in the bank. The first and perhaps most transformative mindset shift that changed everything for me was moving from scarcity to abundance. And this was not an easy shift to make because scarcity had been ingrained in me since childhood, shaping the way I thought about money, success, and even opportunities. I grew up believing that resources were limited, that if someone else won, I automatically lost, that money was hard to come by and harder to keep, and that wealth was reserved for a select few who had luck, connections, or advantages that I didn't. That belief made me hesitant, cautious, and fearful. I clung to what little I had, constantly worrying that if I took a risk or gave something away, I might never get it back. Living in scarcity meant that I always operated out of fear and limitation, and as long as I carried that mindset, I found myself stuck in the same place, never advancing, always surviving, but never thriving. When I first encountered the idea of abundance, it felt unrealistic, almost naive. How could opportunities be limitless when I could see so much struggle around me? How could wealth be created when the people I knew worked hard every single day and still had nothing left over? But the more I studied successful people, the more I realized that their external results weren't just because of what they did, but because of how they thought. They saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. They saw potential in ideas that others dismissed as impossible. They believed there was always another deal, another connection, another chance. And it hit me. Scarcity had blinded me to opportunities that were right in front of me, while abundance thinking would open my eyes to them. So I began to reprogram my thinking little by little. I started by catching myself when I felt jealousy at someone else's success, because in scarcity, envy thrives. I would think if they can do it, it means it's possible. And if it's possible for them, it can be possible for me. That one simple reframe began to dissolve my resentment and replace it with motivation. I stopped seeing others as competition and started seeing them as examples, even inspiration. Another change I made was in how I responded to opportunities. Scarcity told me to cling tightly to what I had, to never risk, to never spend. But abundance taught me that money flows, that energy flows, and that by giving, investing, or taking a chance, I could create more instead of running out. I began to give more generously, not just with money, but with time, energy, and knowledge. And I noticed something powerful. The more I gave, the more doors opened for me. Abundance also transformed the way I viewed failure. In scarcity, a single mistake felt like the end of the road, a sign to stop trying because resources had been wasted. In abundance, failure became just one attempt among many, a stepping stone that would eventually lead me to the result I wanted. Instead of fearing what I could lose, I started asking myself what I could gain, and that question led me to take bold steps I never would have considered before. The most surprising part of embracing abundance was how it changed my relationships. When I lived in scarcity, I guarded my ideas, afraid someone might steal them, and I avoided collaboration because I believed there wasn't enough success to share. But when I shifted to abundance, I realized the opposite was true. By sharing, by networking, by collaborating, I multiplied my opportunities. The world is full of partnerships, connections, and relationships waiting to be built, but you only see them when you stop living in fear of lack. Over time, this mindset of abundance became second nature. I started noticing opportunities everywhere in conversations, in setbacks, and things I had overlooked for years. Scarcity had kept my vision narrow, focused only on survival, but abundance expanded my vision so wide that I could see potential paths in every direction. And once you begin to see abundance, you cannot unsee it. You start to expect good things. And when you expect them, you prepare for them. And when you prepare, you're ready to seize them when they arrive. That readiness was what turned opportunities into millions, because abundance didn't just make me hopeful. It made me bold, decisive, and willing to act when others hesitated. The second mindset shift that transformed my life and wealth was moving from being busy to being productive. And at first, I didn't even realize there was a difference because, like so many people, I grew up believing that working hard was the ultimate formula for success. I thought if I stayed late, if I filled my calendar, if I checked off endless tasks, then I was moving forward. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor, proudly telling people how busy I was, as if being busy meant I was valuable. But the truth was, I was spinning my wheels. I was pouring energy into things that looked like work, but didn't actually create results. Business was keeping me broke, tired, and distracted, while productivity was the real engine of wealth. The turning point came when I started to study the routines of highly successful people. I noticed that they weren't constantly rushing or juggling 100 things at once. They seemed calm, focused, and intentional. Some of them worked fewer hours than I did, but they produced exponentially greater results. I asked myself why. The answer was simple but powerful. They understood leverage, they understood focus, and they knew the difference between activity and accomplishment. They weren't trying to do more. They were trying to do the right things. That realization was humbling because it exposed how much of my time was being wasted. So I began to audit my days. I looked at everything I was doing and asked, does this task create income, growth, or impact, or is it just noise? What I discovered shocked me. Most of what I did could be eliminated or delegated, yet I had been clinging to it because it felt comfortable. Answering emails, organizing files, attending meetings that went nowhere, these activities gave me the illusion of productivity, but in reality, they stole my time from what really mattered. Once I accepted that business is not a virtue, I began stripping away the unnecessary and focusing on the essentials. Productivity meant identifying my highest value activities and giving them my best energy. For me, that meant sales, strategy, networking, and personal growth. These were the activities that generated revenue, expanded opportunities, and multiplied results. Once I prioritized those, I noticed something incredible. My income began to grow while my stress decreased. I was no longer drowning in tasks that didn't matter. Instead, I was moving with precision and clarity. Each day became about progress, not just motion. Another key lesson I learned was that productivity isn't about time management, it's about energy management. I had to recognize when I performed best and use that time for my most important work. For me, mornings became sacred. Instead of wasting them on social media or minor errands, I dedicated those hours to deep, focused work. By aligning my energy with my priorities, I began accomplishing more in a few hours than I used to in an entire day of business. That one change alone multiplied my efficiency and income. I also discovered the power of systems and delegation. Business had me believing I had to do everything myself, but productivity taught me to leverage the strengths of others. I started outsourcing tasks that didn't require my direct involvement. I built systems that automated repetitive work. Instead of trying to be everywhere and do everything, I positioned myself where I was most valuable. This freed my time, sharpened my focus, and allowed me to scale my efforts. Suddenly, I was no longer trapped in the cycle of constant activity. I was building momentum. The psychological difference between business and productivity is profound. Business comes from insecurity, the need to feel important by staying occupied. Productivity comes from clarity, the confidence of knowing what truly matters. When I lived in business, I always felt behind, no matter how much I did. When I embraced productivity, I felt in control, even if my to-do list wasn't finished. That shift gave me peace of mind and allowed me to make decisions from a place of power rather than pressure. What amazed me most was how people began to respond differently. When I was busy, I attracted other busy people, always rushing, always overwhelmed. But when I became productive, I attracted partners, clients, and opportunities that valued results. People noticed my clarity, my focus, and my discipline, and they wanted to be part of it. Productivity didn't just change my schedule. It changed my influence, my network, and ultimately my income. The third mindset shift that reshaped everything for me was moving from spending to investing. And this one was especially difficult because I had built habits that made me feel like spending was a reward for working hard. When I first started making money, even if it was only a little, my first instinct was to spend it on things that made me look successful rather than actually making me successful. I bought clothes I didn't need, gadgets that didn't matter, and even financed a car that made me feel like I had arrived when in reality it was dragging me deeper into debt. At that stage, money came into my hands and left just as quickly, and I didn't realize that I was sabotaging my future by treating every dollar as disposable instead of as an opportunity to grow wealth. The turning point came when I learned to see money differently, not as something to use up, but as something to put to work. I remember hearing the phrase that money is like a soldier. You can either waste it on vanity and watch it die, or you can deploy it strategically and watch it multiply. That idea completely reframed how I thought about every financial decision. Each dollar wasn't just currency, it was potential. It could either go out and disappear in the form of another pair of shoes or another dinner out, or it could go out and bring back more dollars if I invested it wisely. Once I embraced that way of thinking, my relationship with money shifted from consumption to multiplication. I started with the simplest but most powerful investment, investing in myself. For the longest time, I thought spending money on courses, coaching, books, or seminars was a waste. Why pay for something intangible when I could buy something I could show? But the moment I invested in personal growth, I began to see a return that was far greater than any material purchase could give me. Knowledge, skills, and mentorship opened doors that I didn't even know existed. The money I put into my growth paid me back not just once, but over and over again in the form of opportunities, strategies, and confidence. From there, I moved to investing in assets. Instead of wasting money on liabilities that drained me every month, I focused on things that could generate income or appreciate in value. I looked at real estate, at stocks, at businesses, and at building systems that could work without me. It wasn't easy at first because the temptation to spend never goes away. The pull of instant gratification is strong. But I learned to delay gratification, to trade the thrill of something temporary for the stability of something lasting. That discipline was the foundation of my financial breakthrough. Another shift was learning to differentiate between good debt and bad debt. Scarcity thinking had me terrified of debt, while consumer culture had me drowning in it. When I embraced the investor mindset, I learned that debt used strategically to acquire assets or fund growth could actually accelerate wealth, while debt used for consumption would always enslave me. Understanding that difference was like unlocking a secret code to financial freedom. What surprised me most was how investing changed not just my bank account, but also my perspective. Spending made me feel empty because once the excitement of a purchase wore off, I was left with less money and no progress. Investing, on the other hand, made me feel empowered because every decision I made was building a future that was bigger than my present. Even when an investment didn't pay off immediately, I knew it was part of a larger process of growth. I also realized that investing wasn't just about money. It was about time, energy, and relationships. Where I invested my attention determined the quality of my life. When I invested time in building relationships with the right people, I gained access to networks and opportunities that money alone could not buy. When I invested energy in health and discipline, I created the stamina to pursue bigger goals. When I invested focus into learning my craft deeply, I built expertise that positioned me as valuable in the marketplace. Every form of investment compounded just like financial investments do, and together they created exponential growth. Making this shift required humility because it meant admitting that my old way of handling money wasn't working. It meant resisting the pressure to show off success before I had actually built it. It meant being patient when others were rushing to enjoy the immediate rewards of spending. But it also meant that over time, I could live in a way that others couldn't because I was willing to make sacrifices that most people avoided. The fourth mindset shift that completely altered my trajectory was moving from fear of failure to hunger for learning. And this transformation did not happen overnight because fear of failure was deeply ingrained in me from an early age. I was conditioned to believe that mistakes were signs of weakness, that getting something wrong meant I wasn't good enough, and that failure was proof that I should stop trying. This fear kept me trapped in cycles of hesitation. I would overthink opportunities, analyze them endlessly, and eventually do nothing because I was afraid of the embarrassment, the judgment, or the financial loss that might come if I failed. Living with that fear meant that I played life on defense instead of offense, always avoiding risks, always choosing the safe path, and as a result, staying stuck in mediocrity. The first time I began to question this belief was when I studied the lives of people I admired. Every single one of them had failed multiple times, and in many cases, their failures were massive and public. Yet instead of letting those failures define them, they used them as stepping stones. That realization hit me hard. The very people I thought were untouchable had fallen down more times than I had even attempted to stand up. I realized that my fear of failing had been holding me back from the very experiences that could have taught me the lessons I needed to grow. I decided to reframe failure, to stop seeing it as an ending and start seeing it as feedback. Failure became data, not defeat. Each time something didn't work, instead of asking, why me, I began asking, what can I learn? This simple reframe gave me the courage to take action, even when I wasn't sure of the outcome. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me because my hunger to learn became stronger than my fear of looking foolish. When I embraced failure as feedback, I started to take more risks. I launched projects, tried new strategies, and stepped into spaces I would have previously avoided. Not everything worked. In fact, many of those attempts failed, but every single one of them taught me something valuable. Each failure sharpened my instincts, refined my judgment, and prepared me for bigger opportunities. The mistakes that used to paralyze me became the very fuel for my growth. One of the most important lessons I learned was that failure is never final unless you quit. As long as I kept moving, each setback simply became part of the process. I began to think of failure the same way athletes think of training. Every missed shot, every stumble, every loss is part of the preparation for eventual victory. That mindset gave me resilience. Instead of avoiding challenges, I began seeking them because I knew that the more I stretched myself, the more I would learn and the faster I would grow. What surprised me most was how people began to view me differently. When I lived in fear, I projected hesitation and people sensed it. Opportunities slipped past me because no one wants to follow someone who is afraid to act. But when I embraced learning through failure, I projected confidence and resilience. People began to trust me more, not because I was perfect, but because they could see I was willing to adapt, to improve, and to keep moving no matter what happened. This shift also helped me develop creativity and problem-solving skills. When you're afraid of failure, your mind only looks for safe options. But when you're hungry to learn, your mind opens up to experimenting, to trying unconventional approaches, to pushing boundaries. That creativity gave me an edge in business and in life. I stopped copying what everyone else was doing and started finding my own path. Some experiments didn't work, but the ones that did set me apart from the crowd. Over time, the fear that once held me hostage began to fade because I had faced it so many times that it lost its power. I realized that failure was never as catastrophic as I imagined it to be. The embarrassment faded, the losses healed, but the lessons stayed with me forever. That gave me the courage to take even bigger risks, and those bigger risks led to bigger rewards. The truth is, success hides behind the very failures we are afraid to face. And the moment you stop fearing them and start chasing the lessons they contain, you unlock growth that would otherwise remain hidden. The fifth mindset shift that changed the course of my life was moving from asking, what do I get, to asking, how can I serve? And this transformation was one of the most powerful because it rewired not only the way I looked at money, but also the way I looked at people. For much of my early journey, I was focused on what I could take from every situation. I asked questions like, how much will I earn? What's in it for me? How will this benefit me right now? This mindset made me transactional in my relationships and short-sighted in my opportunities. I measured every decision by what I could extract from it, and that approach limited my growth because it made me blind to the bigger truth about wealth creation, which is that money is simply a reward for solving problems. When I began studying highly successful entrepreneurs, leaders, and visionaries, I noticed a common theme. They didn't build empires by constantly asking what they could get. They built them by constantly asking how they could serve. They looked at the world and asked, what problems can I solve? What value can I create? How can I make someone else's life easier, better, or more fulfilling? The more people they served, the more wealth followed them. That realization was a breakthrough for me because I finally understood that income is a byproduct of impact. If you want to make more money, you don't chase the money. You chase the problems worth solving and the people worth serving. So I began to shift my perspective. Instead of entering situations with a mindset of extraction, I started entering with a mindset of contribution. In every interaction, I asked myself, how can I help this person? What value can I bring? What resource, idea, or connection can I provide? At first, it was uncomfortable because I was so conditioned to protect my time, my energy, and my resources. But the more I practiced it, the more I realized something powerful. When you lead with value, opportunities multiply. People remember you, people trust you, people want to work with you, and people open doors for you that you could never have opened on your own. This shift changed how I approach business. Instead of creating products or services based on what I thought would make me money, I began creating based on what people actually needed and wanted. I listened more, I observed more, I asked better questions, and I focused on solving real pain points. The result was that my work became more impactful, more relevant, and more profitable. Customers weren't just buying from me, they were grateful to me because I was serving them in ways that truly mattered. It also changed my relationships. When I was focused on what I could get, my relationships were shallow, often strained, because people could sense that I was only in it for myself. But when I shifted to serving, my relationships deepened. People felt valued, respected, and supported, and in return, they wanted to support me. This created a network of genuine connections built on trust rather than transactions, and that network became one of my greatest assets. Another profound realization was that service brings fulfillment in ways that money alone never can. There's a unique joy that comes from knowing you've made someone else's life better. Even in small ways, that joy fuels motivation, and that motivation fuels consistency. When I was only chasing money, I would burn out quickly because the pursuit felt empty. But when I was focused on serving, I found energy I didn't know I had because the purpose behind my work was so much bigger than myself. This mindset also made me more resilient. When you're focused only on what you get, failure feels devastating because you think you've lost everything. But when you're focused on serving, failure becomes tolerable because you know you're still learning, still growing, still helping in different ways. Even setbacks carry meaning when service is at the core. That resilience kept me moving forward during times when others might have quit. Ultimately, shifting from asking, what do I get, to asking, how can I serve, expanded my vision of success. It stopped being about accumulation and started being about contribution. I began to measure my progress not just by how much money I was making, but by how many lives I was touching, how much impact I was creating, and how much value I was delivering. Ironically, the more I focused on service, the more money came in because the marketplace rewards those who give the most value. The sixth mindset shift that unlocked a new level of growth and wealth for me was moving from short-term thinking to long-term vision. And this was one of the hardest changes to make because human nature craves instant gratification. In my early years, I chased quick wins. I wanted the deal that would pay me today, the opportunity that would give me fast results, the shortcut that would save me effort. That approach gave me small bursts of excitement, but left me with nothing sustainable. It was like eating candy for energy. It gave me a quick rush, but no nourishment. I would work on projects, abandon them when they didn't deliver immediate results, and then start something new, repeating the cycle without realizing I was wasting time, energy, and potential. The turning point came when I began to study the principle of compounding. I realized that just as money compounds when invested wisely, so do habits, skills, and relationships. The people I admired, the ones who had built lasting wealth and influence, were not chasing quick wins. They were planting seeds and patiently nurturing them, knowing that in time, those seeds would grow into something far bigger than they could imagine. They were willing to delay gratification today for exponential rewards tomorrow. That realization forced me to confront the truth that my impatience was costing me far more than my failures ever did. So I began to practice long-term thinking. I started asking myself different questions. Instead of asking, what will this give me today? I asked, what will this build for me in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? That shift made me approach opportunities differently. I became less interested in shortcuts and more interested in strategies that would stand the test of time. I stopped abandoning projects too soon and started committing to them long enough to see them grow. I shifted from being a sprinter to being a marathon runner, and that change gave me stability and momentum. This long-term vision also changed the way I handled money. Short-term thinking made me spend for pleasure. Long-term thinking made me invest for growth. I no longer needed to impress people with what I had today because I was more focused on who I would become tomorrow. I understood that every sacrifice now was an investment in my future self. That gave me the discipline to resist the temptation of short-term pleasures and the patience to stay consistent with long-term goals. It also transformed how I built relationships. Short-term thinking treats people as stepping stones, useful only for immediate gains. Long-term vision treats people as partners, collaborators, and allies in a journey. I learned to invest in relationships without expecting instant returns. I gave time, trust, and value freely, knowing that genuine relationships compound just like money does. Years later, those same relationships opened doors I never could have forced open on my own. Another powerful lesson from long-term vision was that consistency beats intensity. In the past, I would go all in for a short burst of effort, then burn out and quit when results didn't show quickly. But when I embraced long-term thinking, I understood that steady, consistent action over years creates results that intensity in a short burst never could. This applied to business, to health, to personal growth. Daily habits, small disciplines, quiet efforts compounded into massive transformation over time. What surprised me was how freeing this mindset became. Short-term thinking had kept me in constant anxiety, always worried about immediate outcomes, always pressured to see quick proof of success. Long-term vision gave me peace because I no longer judged myself by what happened in a week or a month. I measured progress by the direction I was moving, not the speed of immediate results. That shift gave me the patience to stay the course, even when success seemed far away, because I knew that every step forward was compounding into something greater. This mindset also gave me resilience during setbacks. When you're locked in short-term thinking, a single failure feels catastrophic because it wipes out everything you were counting on. But with long-term vision, failure becomes just one chapter in a much bigger story. It's easier to keep going when you know the destination is far ahead and the journey is filled with twists and turns. Long-term vision gave me the strength to endure seasons of struggle because I understood they were temporary and that persistence would eventually bring results. In the end, moving from short-term thinking to long-term vision not only helped me build wealth, but also helped me build character. It forced me to develop patience, discipline, and foresight. It made me value the process as much as the outcome. It shifted my focus from quick success to lasting legacy. And that change has been one of the most important foundations of everything I've achieved.